March 1945. The Rhineland, Western Germany. An American infantry sergeant, rifle in hand, is standing 20 feet from a German officer. The officer is still in full uniform. Polished boots, iron cross at his collar, a Luger holstered at his hip. He has not reached for it. He is not going to fight. His unit has surrendered around him. His men are already sitting in the mud at the roadside, hands on their heads, watching. But the officer has not reached for the Luger to surrender it either. He is simply standing there, rigid, eyes level, waiting. The sergeant says it again, drop the weapon. The officer does not move. Somewhere behind the sergeant, an MP shifts his weight. A rifle clicks in the quiet. What happens in the next 30 seconds? On this road, in this moment, in this collision between two very different ideas about what it means to be a soldier, is a story that plays out, in one form or another, across the Western Front in the final months of the war. By late 1944, the German war machine is coming apart at every seam. The summer's catastrophe in France has not been recovered from. The failed Ardennes offensive, what the Allies call the Battle of the Bulge, costs the Wehrmacht the last of its trained reserves. Fuel is gone. Replacements are children and old men. Divisions that had fought across the breadth of Europe, from the English Channel to the outskirts of Moscow, from the deserts of North Africa to the forests of the Eastern Front, are now reduced to fragments, surrounded, or simply running out of reasons to keep dying. The surrenders come in waves. By early 1945, American forces are processing thousands of German prisoners every single day. Whole regiments lay down their arms. Garrison commanders send officers forward under white flags. The roads back from the front are crowded with Germans, moving in the wrong direction, hands raised, filing past American soldiers, who can barely believe the scale of what they are seeing. It should be simple. The war is ending. Men who want to live are choosing to live, but within that vast tide of surrender, a friction keeps surfacing. Quiet, persistent, and sometimes dangerous. And it comes almost exclusively from the officer class. To understand why some German officers behave the way they do in these final months, you have to understand what it means, inside their military culture, to surrender. The Prussian tradition, the tradition that runs through the Wehrmacht like a spine, treats the surrendering of a weapon as a formal act, not simply a practical one. For many officers, the expectation is clear. A man of rank surrenders his sidearm to an officer of equal or higher standing, not to a private, not to a corporal. Rank acknowledges rank. Defeat, when it must come, is acknowledged between professional equals. This is not pure arrogance. Though arrogance is sometimes present, it is something older. These officers have been shaped from their earliest days in uniform to see the rituals of military life, the salutes, the ceremonies, the careful hierarchies of deference, as the very thing that separates a professional army from a mob. To abandon those rituals, even in defeat, is to abandon something they believe defines them as soldiers. And so, on roads across Germany in the spring of 1945, you get the strange spectacle of men who know the war is lost, who have no intention of dying that afternoon, who are perfectly prepared to become prisoners, but who would strongly prefer not to hand their weapon to someone they consider beneath their rank. American soldiers, as a general matter, do not share this framework. The United States Army in 1944 and 1945 is not built on Prussian tradition. It is built on something more practical. Officers and enlisted men come from a society that views rank as functional rather than sacred. A lieutenant is in charge because someone has to be in charge, not because he belongs to a different order of humanity than the private beside him. They eat together, joke together, grouse about the same food, the same weather, and the same army bureaucracy. On the battlefield, this produces a certain directness. American soldiers are trained to accomplish the mission. In the middle of processing prisoners, securing a position, or moving to the next objective. Ceremonial protocol is not the first consideration. It is not that American soldiers have no respect for military custom. It is that in these moments, there is simply no room for it. A German officer refusing to hand over his Luger on the grounds of rank strikes the average GI as somewhere between confusing and genuinely irritating. They are not unsympathetic to the idea of dignity, but they have been fighting across a continent for months. Friends are dead or wounded. There is work still to do. The question of who is properly qualified to accept a captured pistol is not one they have much patience for on that road at that hour. The question in practical terms is simple. What do you do? The confrontations vary in their details, but the basic shape is consistent. An American unit accepts the surrender of a German force. The enlisted men comply without difficulty. Weapons on the ground, hands visible, faces showing the blank relief of men who are done. But the officers, one or two or sometimes more, hold back. They will surrender. They are surrendering, but they wish to surrender to someone of appropriate rank, and the man in front of them is a corporal, or a sergeant, or a lieutenant who is not, in their estimation, senior enough to receive their pistol. Some ask to be taken to the American commanding officer. Others simply stand and wait, as if patience alone will restore the proper order of things. A few explain, in careful and sometimes excellent English, that they mean no disrespect, that this is purely a matter of protocol, and that they would be grateful if the correct procedure could be followed. American officers, when they can be reached quickly, sometimes accommodate the request. A captain walks forward, accepts the weapon, and moves on. The transaction is completed. The German officer's sense of propriety is preserved, and nothing is gained from making it harder than it needs to be. But American officers are not always close at hand. They are managing a dozen other things at once. The front is fluid. The situation changes by the hour, and a German officer standing in the road, with a loaded pistol on his hip, declining to hand it over on grounds of ceremony, is a problem that cannot wait. So American soldiers handle it. The methods are not complicated, and they are not particularly gentle. When a German officer refuses to hand over his weapon, the enlisted men take it. Not ask again, not negotiate. Take it. The holster is unsnapped, the pistol removed, the belt unbuckled if necessary. If the officer resists physically, and some do, not to escape, but out of reflex or wounded pride, he is restrained. His hands are bound, and he is sat down with the rest of the prisoners. In some cases, soldiers remove the holster entirely, without waiting for a discussion to develop. One hand on the weapon. Unsnap. Done. MPs processing large numbers of prisoners. Sometimes disarm officers as a matter of routine, before the question of rank can even be raised. The Luger goes into a collection pile with the others. The officer's feelings on the matter are, at best, briefly noted. There is no particular cruelty in most of these accounts. American soldiers are not going out of their way to humiliate. They are doing the job the most direct way available. The pistol is a weapon. Weapons are collected at surrender. In the field, the reasoning rarely goes further than that. Put yourself inside the experience, and the distance between the two men is almost difficult to measure. The American sergeant accepting a surrender has been in Europe perhaps for 8 months. He is 22 or 23 years old. Before the war, he worked in a factory in Ohio, or drove a truck in Georgia, or spent his days behind a counter in a hardware store in Pennsylvania. He was drafted, trained, shipped across the ocean, and pointed at Germany. He wants to do his job and go home. The German officer's feelings about the proper procedure for his disarmament are real enough. He can see that plainly. But they cannot be his concern. Not here, not today. The German officer, meanwhile, is watching everything he has known come apart. He knows the war is over. He knows rationally that what is happening is the only thing that could be happening. But the rituals of his profession are the last thing standing between him and the total dissolution of a life's worth of order and meaning, holding on to them even now. Even in the mud of a German road in March, it is the only act of dignity still within reach. And then an American private, not unkindly, simply reaches over and takes the pistol off his hip. The look on his face, in the photographs that survive from these moments, is not quite anger and not quite grief, something harder to name. The expression of a man finding that the world ends, not with ceremony, but with a transaction. What these small encounters reveal is something larger than the question of who hands over which pistol. The Wehrmacht, in its final months, is not simply losing a war. It is losing the internal logic that held it together, the sense of hierarchy, order, and professional identity that made it, for years, one of the most formidable fighting forces in modern history. The rituals that German officers hold on to in these last weeks are not affectations. They are the remaining structure of a military culture that is collapsing from within. American soldiers, largely without intending to, are meeting that collapse at its most personal level. In the field, during the processing of prisoners, the ceremonial weight of a German officer's surrender simply does not factor into their calculations. They are not trying to dismantle a tradition. The work in front of them is concrete and urgent, and it leaves no room for rituals that belong to another army's understanding of defeat. What German officers later described as the hardest part was not hostility. It was indifference. The things they believed gave their surrender its proper gravity. Rank, protocol, the acknowledgement of one professional by another, did not appear to register at all. A shrug, a removal of the pistol, an MP pointing toward the holding area, for an officer shaped by decades inside a system that treated these gestures as weighty and significant. That indifference was, in its own way, harder to absorb than open contempt might have been. As the war moves into its final weeks, something shifts. German officers who had been insisting on proper rank for their disarmament begin, in growing numbers, to simply comply. Not because the tradition has stopped mattering. In many cases it still does, but because the situation has moved beyond any point where it can be meaningfully upheld. When a man is part of a surrendering army group, when the general above him is negotiating terms of capitulation, when the command structure around him has dissolved, asking the corporal in front of him to find someone of suitable rank to accept a Luger becomes difficult to justify, even to himself. What had felt like a matter of dignity starts to feel like something else entirely. German officers, for all their reverence for tradition, are not fools. They read the situation, and by April 1945, the situation is clear enough that even the most tradition-bound officer understands the time for ceremony has passed. The pistols come off the hips, one after another, and go into American hands. However those hands happen to be ranked, there is something worth sitting with. In these small moments on German roads, two men standing 20 feet apart, one holding a rifle, one holding on to the last remnant of a professional identity built over a lifetime, both of them tired, both of them, in their own way, waiting for it to be over. The standoff resolves the way it has to resolve, not because one man is stronger or braver than the other, but because the war has already decided the outcome, and what remains is simply accepting it. The German officer is not a lesser soldier for holding on to what he was trained to hold on to. He is a man shaped by a system that has now ended, standing on a road in the ruins of it, finding that the world he served no longer exists. What remains on both sides is just men. Men on a road, in the mud, in the fading light of a war that has taken too long and cost too much. The pistol changes hands, and both of them can, finally, go home. By May 8, 1945, VE Day, more than 3.4 million German soldiers had surrendered to Western Allied forces.